How did I get here? It's probably why should I be here? We're raised in an environment where it's all about blame and it's all about happening to me and oh my God and why me and how is this all about me? And but the reality is that we started this whole thing. And I'm going to tell you how. You're going to have to figure out why. That's not my fault. I wasn't involved at any level, as you might suspect. We do exist non-physically. And most of us, certainly everybody in this room, has existed non-physically for a long time. And we have gone through many changes and many permutations and much growth and so on over eons. The whole concept of spirituality is individual. In the original creation, deity, which is not the same as your idea of God, deity had within it two co-equal energies, love and strength. And as deity grew, its whole concept was self-discovery. But whenever you have a direction, at some point in the fulfillment of that direction, the replacement direction begins to develop. And in deity's case, the replacement direction was sharing. So while it's consumed with this idea of self-discovery, a secondary influence was beginning to grow called share what you've discovered. And when that secondary direction began to equal the initial direction, so you have now sort of a tug-of-war between self-discovery and share, what happens is there's a buildup of energy, which the minute that deity became willing to release became motivation, and it spewed out consciousnesses, all of which were unique because all were a different balance of love and strength. There was no deliberate molding of anything. It was a spontaneous orgasm of energy. And each identity within that was unique because each was a different balance of love and strength. And then over time they grew and they developed and they reached that point and they spewed out consciousnesses, each one of which was unique because it was a different balance of the balance of love and strength that was in the source that spewed them out. So it looks a little like you've got this concept called deity, and within it there are two seemingly equal consciousnesses of love and strength, and then in the creation there were all these unique consciousnesses, all of whom had different levels of love and strength. And then the worst. And so they then grew, and they got to the point where they began to spew out consciousnesses, each of which was a different balance of their source. So there are no two consciousnesses in the billions of consciousnesses that are identical. Now, the less developed a consciousness is, the more similar it is to other consciousnesses at its same level. The more developed it is, the more unique it is, the less like any other consciousness it becomes. You with me so far? Don't let me leave you at the curb. This bus has no reverse. So anyway, So when you get to the level of your development, it's hard for you to identify with anybody except the mirror, with whom you're no longer friends. But it's hard to identify with anybody else because you're not like anybody else. But as you go down the scale, there is more and more commonality. So everybody in the trailer park in Fayette, you know, is very much on the same page. They're all unique individuals, but they have so much in common. They respond to the same influences, they have the same needs and the same communication skills, the same levels of comprehension and perception. And then you walk into, you know, some meeting in Silicon Valley, and you've got all these incredibly uber bright people who are no more different than the people in Fayetteville. Because spiritual development has nothing to do with intelligence. Spiritual development is spiritual development. And the lower the level of spiritual development, the more they tend to group. Which is where you get neighborhoods frequently. And you can go into most neighborhoods if the knee-jerk liberals haven't had their way, and the people in those neighborhoods are going to be very similar. Unless somebody insists they get bust somewhere they're not comfortable, and then everybody will be the same except them. Because similar draws similar. This isn't a racial, this is a consciousness development level. And that doesn't know any barriers or isolation. But, you know, you can see by the television news broadcasts that they aim at a certain target level of awareness, the most easily panicked, usually. And because that gets the most clicks. And so then as you grow and develop, you have to make more and more of your own decisions. You are less and less comfortable with other people's choices for you, and then it becomes more and more difficult in a society that is about getting along and all being the same and all being the same. It's harder to get along in that kind of society because you don't fit. And that everybody being the same has nothing to do with this. That's an artificially constructed idea that the less developed have generated so that nobody will make them uncomfortable by being different. Now, when you are on the other side, when you are not in this level of awareness, you exist as an energy, a conscious, unique, individual energy. Once you are created, you never not are you. And your job, if it could be presented that way, is to fulfill who you are. So the less developed you are, the smaller the job, because the smaller the tool, the smaller the consciousness base. The more developed you are, the more that process is complicated and involved, and the more facets it has, and something has to channel it. Otherwise, you're going to be this amazing consciousness in this undefined body that doesn't have any features, that has no idea where it's going, but it's thrilled it's here. And, you know, that doesn't work very well, not even with Obamacare. So, when you are on the non-physical side and you are participating in yourself, in that consciousness that you are, you're going to find areas that are inelastic, that are sort of an obstacle, that are sort of limiting. So when you encounter one of those, if you want to stay over on that side, what you do is you just try to surround that area and digest it over time. Eons of time. But now that there is physical creation, and now that there are bodies and stuff like that, you have another option. So this is you, I know it's very attractive, and there's this area in you that is just so stubborn that you could screech if you had a mouth, and it's annoying you. And so you decide that you would like to put it in a body. Because putting something like this in a body is like taking a tissue out of a part of your arm that may have a rash, or it may have an infection or something, and putting it under a microscope. So when you look at your body, there's a piece of arm. Oh, no, there's a piece of arm. And so you go under a microscope, and the next thing you see is that it has cells. But if you intensify the microscope, those cells have a whole world within them, of a nucleus and cytoplasm and nucleoplasm and RNA and DNA and mitochondrial DNA on the outsides, and all of these issues in the cells are targeted. Some are nerve cells, some are other aspects, liver cells, whatever. Hopefully the liver cell wasn't on your arm, or you're in more trouble than you thought. So anyway, your consciousness decides that it is going to take this and put it in a body and deal with it. So as you begin to move this, it begins to draw to it, representational, not literal, it begins to draw to it energies from your consciousness that are the opposite of this problem. In other words, the things that can help resolve the problem are drawn to it. You with me? So as you begin to move this more toward this, all of these things begin to form sort of a cohesive package relating to what it is you want to fix or through which you want to grow. We all cool so far? Anyway, so about this. At this point, this doesn't exist. At that point, this is this. Well, it's sort of a butch. All right, so they're going to form, obviously, a zygote. Sort of a fertilized egg, right? But it's where this egg is that's the issue. Because it can't go into just anybody, or it wouldn't have the influences it needs to learn what it needs to learn. So what it does is this starts to be drawn to parents from whom it will get what it needs to put together the right body to learn what it needs to learn. But it also needs parents who, if they fulfill their learning needs, will give it the influences it needs to learn. You with me? That sounds fabulous. Oh good, I'm going to parents that are learning just the stuff I need to learn. Except we get here and don't want to learn it. And we think they're mean. But anyway. Also in the selection of those parents, that selection process is incredibly precise. Because it has to provide you with a body with all of the talents that can handle all the talents, the strengths, and abilities you're bringing in. It has to form around this intention so you as a person project what's necessary to draw the people that can support your growth and keep you away from the people that will interfere with it. give you a body that physically is genetically predisposed to support that learning. So if you need cancer, it has to support that gene. If you need powerful speaking, it needs to put together a voice box that can carry that kind of energy. Some of it will be developed by this as it comes in, but the potential for it has to be there. We're still on the same page. So it begins to be drawn to this particular body that's the product of these people, very NPC, who will give birth to the person that has the potential to be who you need to be. Then as this gets really close to it, it begins to affect the DNA in that developing embryo, so that the embryo reflects you. So even if this is identical twins, whose DNA is almost identical, the operative word is what? Almost. Now we have to understand, with all the research done on DNA and strands thereof and influences of, we're a long way from understanding it. In fact, our understanding of DNA at the moment is more like seeing that this has cells, that your arm has cells. But we're a long way from looking into those cells. And because we are a culture globally that is addicted to dealing with symptoms and not have to be bothered with causes, our investigation of DNA and the things that it can produce in you is not very well understood. But to you it is, because as you come into this body, that body becomes exactly who you need to be. And it is now being born to parents that are the right race, the right economic level, the right location, the right learning lessons within themselves that you need to be able, as you grow, to do your learning. Now we have to remember that most people aren't very fond of learning to begin with. So the fact that you're not tickled with this process, is normal. So there's a kind of rule about this that you've heard me use in other areas that I would like you to be aware of at this stage of this discussion. All pain in dealing with life is the conflict between your needs, wants, and expectations and reality. And only one of those two things will shift. And it's not reality. Just saying. So from this point on, the only really useful question you can ask yourself when things happen is, what am I learning from this? Because it's the only reason anything is going on in your life at the moment. And because this intention is what is driving this life, your intention to resolve this, then that intention is what broadcasts need and draws to you the things in your life that happen. Now, a word about parents in this, because they're as clueless as you've been. The basic premise is that if parents do what they need to do to learn what they need to learn, they will wind up doing what's best for their children's learning. This does not mean staying together for the sake of the kids. This does not mean making decisions that are practical. So it can get to be a struggle here, because parents learn some of it, kids get some of it, kids don't get some of it, kids don't like what's going on with their parents because they haven't been taught to see what the growth that's triggering in them is. All they're aware of is how they feel at the moment, and they don't like it because nobody said to them, gee, if you're uncomfortable with this, why don't we take a look at what it's teaching you that you might be able to use later on. Either teaching you about people, or teaching you about personal responsibility, or teaching you about growth, or teaching you about choices, or teaching you about consideration, or teaching you about, do you see what I mean? Because all of that's in there. Now, that's not fixable. That's already the way it needs to be. What's sometimes interesting is this thing that you want to fix may not be a change that you mean to make in you. It may mean that this is a lack of self-appreciation of growth you've already made. So, if this is in fact something that's going on that's in the way of your expansion and growth, in terms of something wrong with the way that you are currently functioning, you will have what's known as a change incarnation. You will come here with things in you you need to change to resolve this issue so that you feel good about you and you are able to move forward. That is by far the most common of the options. If this, however, is the result of growth you've already made and haven't appreciated or integrated into yourself, then you will have a validation incarnation, which is about learning how to discover who you are and how to validate it and expand it so you can then share it. Here.
There.
So, we are not here under any circumstances as punishment. Sort of. But can we make ourselves miserable? Oh, God, yes! Now, I have to tell you that the most powerful force in the universe is free will. Nothing can interfere with free will. Not even deity. That aspect of you is the most powerful force in your whole identity, the whole course of your existence and development. And nothing can interfere with it. Now, you cannot want to do the work and blame somebody else for what happens, but it's not going to be reality. It's just going to perpetuate the pain. We have to realize that what winds up in here is exactly what it has to be. Now, if we're talking about a change incarnation, the word karma comes up. Now, we currently live in a victim sociology. And that is in large part thanks to one man, the Emperor Constantine, who made a deal with the devil. He had completed the conquering, and his empire was now complete. And as complete as that empire is, the people get restless because there is nothing to motivate them and hold them together. There is nothing like war to get common focus. So he went to the Christians and he said, you guys are doing pretty well. I need a new influence in this empire to kind of hold it together. The gods aren't doing it. If you let me write the book, I'll make you the religion of the empire. And they said, cool. Here are the 29 books that we're working with. Go for it. And so Constantine, being a very intelligent and very clever man, put together a book that did not conflict with his aims and goals for running his empire. And there was really only one thing he had to get rid of to give himself control: reincarnation. So up until the 3rd century, the Christian church, like all other beliefs, taught reincarnation. As of that moment at 304 AD, that disappeared from the Christian teaching, because it undermined the power of the king, the emperor in this case. But with that one decision, he created the victim mentality. Because if what you're going through is not part of an ongoing learning, you have to be the victim of a god, right? And who has access to that god? Constantine and the bishops that bought this, which gave them more power. All that's fine, except it isn't true. What you are going through is part of an ongoing learning that goes back eons. So when you ask yourself, what am I learning from what's going on, your answer is legitimate. And the result of that learning is always designed to expand you, make you, make you more exciting to you. There is nothing in spirituality that is geared to duplication. It is all geared to fueling the uniqueness that happened when this initial creation and its subsequent creations went on. It's designed to help you be as unique as you are, and to help you own and build that so your contribution to the whole is significant. And spirituality doesn't care what you do. It's only interested in what you learn from what you do and the results. Because learning is an experimental process. It's not a test. It's an experimental process. And as you experiment with life and development at this level, you learn things. Some things you may not want to repeat, God knows. Some things you can't get enough of, bless your hearts. But all of it moves you forward in the overall process of becoming you. And uniquely you. Even if it's a positive thing, like sex. I deliberately picked something Constantine wasn't happy about. If it's sex is as different as everybody in this room. No people, 2 people in this room experience it the same way. Some don't even experience it. So, the reality is that no matter what it is that may be a quote-unquote common experience, it isn't common, because everybody relates to it differently. Now, the more physical you are, the more common the experience is. That's why Barbara Cortlandt was so successful. She wrote all those bodice ripper gothic novels of sex and passion and all that stuff. Smart lady, she made millions, even more than Harry Potter. So, but we grew up with this idea, whether we learned it directly or in the neighborhood, is that sex is supposed to be this spectacular, exciting fireworks experience that is just earth-moving. And almost nobody in this room has ever had that, because you're not physical enough. When you go down to more limited consciousness, their bodies are very physical, and they have those experiences. And they are truly earth-moving. They can be in the middle of it and fall off the bed and not even know they fell off the bed. You can be in the middle of fulfillment and worry whether the door's locked. But on the other side of this, you need more of it to stay grounded, And therefore you would have higher sex drives. Not more intense, higher. Now that doesn't mean you have to have sex every time you have the thought, thank God, but what it means is that that kind of energy keeps you grounded, it keeps you focused. It sometimes is a reason to go to a meeting. It may be the reason to go, do you know what I mean? It's never the reason they go to a meeting. They already met their girl or boy or whatever. They go because they want to learn something or they need to understand. We never go for that simpler reason. There always has to be that, maybe. Maybe this time. For the last time, no. So anyway, so while this process is the same, the results of that process can be very, very different. Because if the learning lesson is a changed lesson and not very developed, then the body choice is a lot more generous. It doesn't matter as much which parent you have. So it's easier for your parents to have 12 kids. And they're all going to be unique, but they're all going to be very similar. But the more sophisticated this learning is, whether it's change or validation, because validation can be very limited as well. You know, if you're at a very limited consciousness and you complete a learning, there needs to be a time to come back and own what you've grown. So, you know, validation isn't any great spiritual leap, but its process is different. But the lower level the conscious development is, then the less important the actual physical manifestation is where you're born. I mean, there are some things that are critical because they expose you to certain influences. Race could be gender could be a very important one. Economic level is very important. Area you're born can be very important because of the influences around you and the things through which you can learn and grow and so on. But the more sophisticated this is, then the more sophisticated this has to be. And that's why you don't feel things the way most people do. That's why when you go to talk about a problem, most people say, oh, you'll be fine. Wait a minute, didn't I just tell you I'm going through it? Yeah, you'll be fine. Thanks. But they don't get it. They can't understand it. And that's the other thing I want to mention in this. People can't know what they don't know. So they assume what they know is everything there is to know. So they then work on that idea. And if you try to give them information beyond what they can understand, they think you're lying or part of the conspiracy. So the idea of yelling more loudly at them will not get the point across. They just can't understand what you're trying to say. And they can get so caught up in the most unimportant of items to the point where they vote that way because they can't understand anything more than that. And they are the majority. Because the pyramid of consciousness is the same as the pyramid of development. The top 15% are spiritual and the top 15% are validation or change. You can have change in that top 15%. That top 15% is the most developed. Everything below it, validation or change, has limitations to understanding. And they just can't get it. When I first started giving readings, or lectures rather, I would sometimes say, you know, when somebody would ask a question, believe it or not, I would say, wasn't I speaking English? Now you may say, what an arrogant son of a bitch he is. But the reality is, haven't you had that attitude toward people that didn't get what you were saying? Yeah! So get off my back! But the reality is, they just can't. So move on. Stop annoying them. Move on to people at your own level who can understand what you're trying to say. But the thing that turned me around is when somebody in the audience said to me, Bill, I understand what you said, I don't understand the concept. See, and that's what brings us the understanding. Oh, yeah, we did understand the words, we don't get the concept because it's far too spiritually sophisticated for the particular person that heard it. That's not a condemnation of the person, it's just a definition of the parameters of their understanding. That's all. But for us, it has to be very frustrating if we don't get the fact that most people just can't, and that life is a pyramid of consciousness, and most people are here. And most people, and trust me, successful, bright, clever have nothing to do with spiritual understanding. Perfect example of that just died. Steve Jobs. Very undeveloped spiritual man, but incredibly bright. Incredibly bright. But one of the most obnoxious people on the planet. But not because he was bright, just because he was limited in the areas he could understand. I would imagine Isaac Newton wasn't any great shakes either. Incredibly bright, but limited in conceptual possibility. So in dealing with people around you, you need to keep that somewhat in the back of your mind. You'll make far fewer rebuttal comments on Yahoo if you keep that in mind. Because what they said may appear incredibly stupid, but it truly is their belief. And nothing you say will change it. And then you'll find yourself at their level resorting to name-calling out of frustration. So please try to understand that this process applieth to everybody. Now, yes, most of you were born earlier in this process over here, so you are far more developed, because you were far more developed when you were created, because you were a lot closer to the source. So you haven't had to do as much growing over time as somebody that was created down here in that process. So most of you are spiritual validation who are in the room, in fact, all of you. So yeah, you started further ahead, which is part of the reason you're having so much trouble understanding them. Now there's also another way of growing and learning, and I'm going to introduce this just to be annoying. I like this guy, so we'll leave this one and we'll change this one. Because this one's beginning to look like, who's that ghost?
Looks like
Casper on meth. So we don't want to, we don't want to encourage that. So we'll just sort of take this off, and we'll talk about you non-physically for a minute. So if this is you as a spirit, this, by the way, is the state of Connecticut. But anyway, if this is you as a spirit, if you incarnate for this, then this is the learning vehicle. You with me? Your body, you're in it, that's it. If you're not incarnate, but you want to learn, goodbye Connecticut, you too uptight. But you want to learn, you can spin off consciousnesses that are less developed. They can go out and learn. So you can have 3 or 4 incarnations at once. I know. I told you I did it to be annoying. So you can really have created 3 or 4 different spirits that are out here learning. Even all at the same time, because you're still here. So being spiritual, you can create. So you can spin off subconsciousnesses to learn specific things, and then as they learn, when they die, they go back in and form part of this again. Or if they're more developed, then they can die and go off and become their own little consciousness after they've downloaded. So while you can have 7 billion people, maybe 9 by now, it's after lunch. But if you have 7 billion people, you know, you may only have like 1 billion higher level consciousnesses, and that's really overstating it, probably about 500,000 at this level. Now, I mean 500 million at this level. So a lot of times these spin-offs that are learning and helping you learn, which is why you created them, are pretty limited in how far they can grow, because they have a very specific learning. Now the last thing I want to touch on is something I talked about earlier, and that's the word karma. We have to understand that karma is about control, or that religion is about control, I'm sorry. Karma is about learning. Karma is not necessarily eye for an eye unless you insist on it. So in this life, because life is an experimental process, you learn by trial and error. In that trial and error, you know, you can make a lot of mistakes. That's not penalization time. The only time it's a problem is if you don't learn from the mistake, and then you need to come back and try to relearn that particular issue that it's clear that you didn't understand. So you can say, well, what if you hurt somebody else? Well, remember I said spirituality doesn't care what you do, it only cares what you learn from it and the results? You can't hurt somebody else if it isn't part of their learning. I could decide to go out and shoot Chris and have the bullet hit Jeff, because Chris isn't supposed to be murdered in this life, and he is. No. But, because you cannot kill somebody who's supposed to not be murdered. You can't do anything to anybody else if it isn't part of their learning. The same process that drew you to your parents and to the area in which you need to grow also draws to you the people from whom you can learn. And in the course of your learning, they're supposed to be learning as well. So if they need to be murdered in this life, somebody's going to murder them. It doesn't have to be you. So ease up. But it can be. As far as spirituality is concerned, nope. You both learn. As far as the police are concerned, you may do your learning in confinement. But as far as spirituality is concerned, they had to die. You learned by murdering, and they wound up dead. Now, I would also point out that children are not children. They're fully developed spirits in developing bodies. The spirit can learn through the body of a child. If a child is murdered, chances are there's no spirit for it. It's a learning lesson for the parents. There'll be a spirit, but it's not designed to live through the whole process. Stillbirth's the same way. Children that die in the first 5 years are more about learning for the parents. There isn't a spirit in there to learn from it. Once in a while, the spirit needs to learn through another dying process, and it will do it as a baby, but for the most part, it's learning for the parents. Children have the first 5 years to decide if they're going to stay. Sometimes if the answer is no, there's another spirit to take the body. And sometimes it just dies depending on the learning needs of the parents and family and extended family and journalists and whoever else is involved in this process. You can't do much without a journalist. There may even be requirements soon for toilet paper purchase. But in any event, so try to realize that nobody's a victim. Everything is part of an ongoing learning. It doesn't mean we don't have normal emotional feelings. It doesn't matter if we lose a child. I mean, of course we grieve it. Of course we feel loss. Of course that's all part of the learning that's involved in that. And if you can see the learning that's part of that and not grieve a non-existent consciousness. And yes, some children need to grow up abused. Some kids have to grow up with alcoholic parents. Some kids have to grow. And in fact, if there's a chance they need an alcoholic parent, usually there'll be two kids for the body. And if the parent gets into recovery, then one spirit will leave and the other one will take the body. Same with divorce. Same with any other conditional event. And they have the first 5 years to determine that. So, of all of this is that whatever's going on in your life, the only reasonable question is, what am I learning from it? And yes, you can go to the part of you not in your body and say, give me what I need to understand it, to see it, and to cooperate with it so I don't have to do it again. Help me to enjoy who I am. That is a legitimate prayer. Help me to see and enjoy who I am. Help me to get excited about the person that I am. Those are all legitimate demands. Let's take a break and then we'll come back and do spot readings, hopefully about some of this. And let's see where we go from there.